So our business is multi-pronged. It's has a lot of history. It was founded in 1940 in Houston. Started out servicing nautical instruments. The original name of the company was Texas Nautical Repair, and the founder was from the Merchant Marine, and he and some friends of his started a company to repair ship's compasses and also to train captains and other officers of the ship on navigation. So it evolved over time to include binoculars because binoculars are a common item on a ship, and they started doing binocular sales and binocular repair. About 30 years ago, they branched off into other optics like telescopes, binoculars, of course, spotting scopes and microscopes. And where Clipboard really comes in is on the microscope side, because we have a very comprehensive microscope servicing business. We're probably one of the largest, we're definitely the largest in the state of Texas, and maybe one of the largest in the US. Now, it is a pretty niche industry, so large is a relative term, but we have technicians that service almost every major medical institution and most of the vets in the Houston area.
Your background before this was engineering. Was that?
That is correct. I have an engineering degree.
So I read a few of your sort of interviews with like some of the universities that you've given that and talked about that journey. I find it fascinating as somebody, and if you don't mind me saying, you're probably too modest to admit it, but you were very successful with what you're doing before. You made a very good career. To pivot to buy a company, to take on the responsibility of taking on a heritage business, knowing that you're going to have to transform it and modernize and introduce new systems and do all that. Like, are you a glutton for punishment, or are you?
I mean, I do like a challenge, but I was in the corporate world, and I worked for some of the largest corporations in America, BP chief among them. And I got to a point in my career where I was tired of reporting to someone else, and the business going out on your own was a risk, and I considered starting a business, but that's an even bigger risk than buying an existing one. So fate was kind on me, and we were able to come up with a plan to acquire this existing business, and it just seemed like a good fit at the time with where I was.
If I was in your shoes, would I feel the weight of responsibility of taking on a business that already had a heritage behind it? Not an entrepreneur as such, but like you're not developing a new business or a new product. You're taking something that already has, like I said, history behind it, really. Well, did that cross your mind, and how did you deal with that?
Absolutely, it did, and it crosses my mind every day. There is a legacy here, and we feel like we're stewards of that legacy. It doesn't mean that we remain static, and we have made changes. In honor of that legacy, though, we're very considered in the changes we make. We, for instance, still repair nautical instruments. That, if you think microscope repair is niche, compass repair is even more niche. And it's not a huge revenue source for us, but, ships come into the port, they need to have their compass repaired, and we still have people who are trained to do it. And we want to maintain that. And, we have an archive of historical artifacts that we maintain that, just kind of chronicle the history of this business.
I mean, at what point does the product range then become the history tour?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is, like I said, compass repair is one of those that is probably, there may be a need for it indefinitely, but it might not be a need that we fill because as staff, retire, we may not replace that expertise. But we do look forward. We've expanded the business a lot since we took it over. We are really kind of high grading our microscope service. And we've also branched into an area that the company wasn't super active in before, which was the birding market. And I know birding's a big thing in the UK. It's also a big thing here in the US. And we have really
twitchers, aren't they? Is that what
that's right? Twitchers. That's what you call them. Here they're birders, but we go to bird festivals all over the United States. In fact, I was just in one last weekend in San Diego, which isn't a bad place to be. And that is a real growth area for us. So while we honor the legacy, we're also branching out into new areas.
And you said about medical and telescopes and all that as well. Then, I mean, although like obviously computer technology and scanning and that sort of stuff has really, medical has really led the way there. I presume a lot of their stuff is still done optically as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Telescopes used to be you would look through it with your eyes, but most amateur astronomers, well, all professional astronomers and most amateur astronomers today are using cameras to capture data and then manipulating that data to extract more information than you can see visually. And so we spend a lot of time, and our customers spend a lot of money. Buying systems that have very sophisticated image capturing devices to assist with their hobby. And you're right that medical really led that. A lot of these cameras that have come into the astronomy market are actually manufactured by companies that initially introduced them in the medical field, because obviously medical is a much higher volume, higher margin, higher price space, and astronomy does not drive that market.
But I looked at I dived into the dark, murky world of forums, particularly within astronomy and lenses and that. And I found a couple of references to your business actually, which really surprised me. Well, not surprised me, but it was pleasant to see it. And if you don't mind, I'd like to read you just a couple of messages that people put on there about your business. One of them from a chap whose username is Surveyor1, which isn't particularly original, but I like his comment. Fortunately, they is you, continues to have quality people up front and behind the scenes to keep things humming. And I think that speaks to what I touched on at the start about taking on a business with a reputation and an expectation to deliver on certain things. Someone there is very pleased that you're maintaining, even after the acquisition, a really high level of service. What do you think about that? I mean,
it's really our focus. We can't compete with the likes of Amazon on price. And Amazon can sell, particularly in the low and mid tier of the astronomy and binocular market, they can sell everything we can sell, and they can usually sell it cheaper. But what they can't do is provide the consultative process behind the sale. And particularly with telescopes and also with binoculars, people aren't experts in those things. They see they see pictures on the internet of other users who are achieving outstanding results, and they want to do the same. And so it's incumbent upon us to hire staff that not only understand the product, but use it on a daily basis. So particularly on the astronomy side, we have some very talented people who spend all of their waking hours, and they spend a lot of time up at night doing astronomy, and then they come in to work and consult with customers on how they can achieve those same results. And the same is true with birding. So if you are selling birding binoculars, the best way to convince someone to do it is to understand what they need to do and what the birds are and where they're located, and be able to just kind of come down to their level and say, I understand what you're trying to accomplish.
I suppose that's when the hobby meets the occupation meets the hobby. Like they, especially for your astronomy guys, you must get through a lot of coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
To be up all night and to be able to carry on the following day.
Well, and to be honest, sometimes they struggle to get into work on time, which is another issue. But
they're enthusiastic, so you give and you take. The other comment from a chap who calls himself Cosmos. Says wonderful company with great products, ditto support. These are getting rarer. Sorry, I'm butchered his comment. I told you it would be me that would make it. Wonderful companies with great products and ditto support are getting rarer these days.
Yeah, that just goes in line with, it's a challenge from a hiring perspective, but we really have to find people who are subject matter experts and who want to practice what they do at work. And
it's hard enough to find an engineer and a technician as it is. And now you're making it even more complicated by saying must have birding experience.
Exactly. Birding or astronomy. It's just in astronomy, binoculars are fairly straightforward. There aren't a lot of accessories you can get, but with astronomy, the sky's the limit as far as the ways and combinations of equipment that you can put together and how you use it.
I love that phrase. Astronomy, the sky's the limit.
Pun intended.
You've definitely seen that on a mug. So, so tell me a little bit about your customers in general. Like, how do they find you? I presume there's a lot of like customers that historically have been coming to Land, Sea, and Sky for a while, or Texas Nautical, and that. And we know that they'll keep coming back because of the likes of Surveyor One and Cosmos here with their comments. But how are you finding new customers?
Well, we do, like, one way on the birding side is we've become very active in attending these bird festivals. So in San Diego, that exposed us to a lot of customers that we had never served before. And it tends to be that once we, if we do our job right, once we acquire a customer, usually if you buy a pair of binoculars or a telescope, it's not the only time you'll buy a pair of binoculars. It's a bit of an addiction. And they'll come back to us because they had a good experience. And so we get a lot of new customers through our outreach at these festivals. Same is true with astronomy. We, partner with local astronomy organizations. There's a couple conventions in the United States geared around astronomy, and we that's how we do it. And just next week, speaking of microscopes, we just haven't really touched on that yet, but we're going to a Veterinary Medical Association convention in Austin that will be able to kind of promote our microscope sales and, more importantly, our microscope service. So it's really about getting in front of qualified customers and making a good impression.
Being seen where they look, I suppose.
Exactly.
Where they go. Yeah.
I mean, we of course do Google ads and all that, but there it's, and that does help, but you don't really get the customer service feel when you click on an ad and buy online.
No, I think there's intent there. So if I'm speaking, and I'm always with these calls, I'm always trying to sort of pivot a little bit to maybe a more generalist market as well. And I think to myself, there is value there if you're looking for people to acquire your services because they're after a specific thing. I think the goal really for a lot of servicing and maintenance businesses is you might not have heard of us, or you've just stumbled across our website via an ad, but now I'm going to keep you. Now I've got to sell that service element to make sure you're kept in the loop with us.
Exactly.
So how does job management software, and when I say that, I mean Clipboard, how does Clipboard fit within your business? How are you using it?
So Clipboard we use exclusively in our microscope servicing business. And, I mentioned earlier that we service most hospitals in the city of Houston. And I'm not sure how it is in the UK, but a lot of these, these are very large hospital systems. Some have dozens of locations, each location with, maybe dozens and dozens of microscopes. And they have, a whole biomedical engineering department that manages the maintenance of all these types of equipment. And their technicians are not experts in any one thing, but their job is to make sure that this equipment is serviced on a periodic and regular basis so that they're compliant with whatever standards they're subject to. And Clipboard has really revolutionized our ability to track that service and to provide them with the information they need. So, with Clipboard, we can create assets for, in this case, specific microscopes. Those assets have serial numbers or asset tags, and we can see the entire service history. We have job forms that allow us to track what was done, what wasn't done. So and we can also see when the next service is due. We generally know how often they do this maintenance, and that's something we were never able to do with our old system. So we would frequently get a call previously, before we started using Clipboard, where the biomedical engineer at a major hospital would say, we have to have 15 microscopes serviced, and we need it by Friday because that's the date that they expire on Friday. And if we don't have availability to do it, it's a real uncomfortable conversation. Like, well, I wish you'd called us 2 weeks ago. But now we can kind of be proactive and say, these services are coming up, and we should contact them ahead of time and say, do you want us to schedule the service? So it really has helped them out.
Your business in a really good light as well to the client, doesn't it? Because you're taking that proactive step because they've got bigger fish to fry. Really, they're concentrating on what they need to do, and I know what it's like just from managing my own diary. Some things just slip, and you forget.
Nope. And there's, like any large organization, there's turnover. So you might not be dealing with the same biomedical tech that you were dealing with a year ago when you did the service. And that person may not have been aware that this was coming up until the last minute. And, it really, before we kept all this information in job notes on the invoice that we would send, but to find it, you couldn't search that database. You had to go back and look for the last time you did a service there and then read the notes. And it just was not easy to make predictions about what was upcoming. You could be reactive. If someone said, when was the last time you serviced it? After a few hours of work, we could usually find it, but we couldn't say, okay, in the next month, we would expect these devices to need to be serviced.
So how does a scenario play out then if, let's just say you've been notified that a particular hospital or in a particular wing of it needs servicing. Talk me through this is how it's going to happen for Land, Sea and Sky.
Yeah, so typically, particularly with larger organizations, they'll call in and say, we have these 15 microscopes that need to be serviced. They'll provide us, usually if they're good, a list of the microscopes and the serial numbers and the details about what kind of equipment it is, and if there's any issues over and above kind of standard maintenance. And we'll prepare a quote. So we'll use Clipboard to prepare that quote, send them the quote, and they generally issue a purchase order that we then take in and schedule the job. Once the job's scheduled, we of course create the job in Clipboard. The technician goes out, and as that technician is servicing the microscopes, they go into each asset and complete the job forms that are needed and record the data on what was done and what other issues they found.
And whatever they're filling out on site, does that become a report that you share afterwards?
So yeah, so it's all done electronically now. We used to use triplicate carbon forms, which are just archaic. That's one of those things where we honored the legacy for a while, but moved on into the 20th century. But they do everything on the app. We have created some custom forms that with check boxes of what standard stuff they do, and then there's a place for notes, and all of those forms are then sent to the biomedical technician so that they can include it in the asset database at the hospital. And previously it was a very manual process to capture that because we captured it all after the fact. We had to generate those reports anyway, but we had to do it in the office, and now it all just happens seamlessly at the time of the service. Did
you get much pushback from your team?
No, not really. I mean, there was a learning curve. It's interesting. So this transition to Clipboard happened at a time when some of our more senior staff were retiring, and we had brought on some new staff. So it was actually a pretty good time for us because we didn't have to force people who maybe weren't as comfortable using an iPhone app to do that, whereas the new people were perfectly they're perfectly fine engaging in that sort of activity.
So how did you find Clipboard, and how did you know that job management software was the thing that you needed?
So I knew we needed to make a change because it was becoming too burdensome to continue on the way we were. I started to look at and I was also looking at a broader ERP system change. So I looked at some of the more comprehensive kind of mid-market like NetSuites and things like that some of those do have service modules. I wasn't quite ready to make that plunge because it is a much larger expense. And so I use Xero for accounting, and Clipboard is recommended Xero partner. So I started looking at it. I looked at a couple others, and I think it was the asset management features of Clipboard that really drew me to it. It seemed to be most in line with the way we did our business. And that was how we got here.
What's your short to long-term plan then at the moment? Are you building this to pass on to your kids, or are you going to develop a bit of an empire of lens manufacturing businesses, or what's your sort of goal?
So, it's interesting in terms of, 5-year plan. We'd like to be the premier optics provider, at least in Texas, and one of the premier ones in the United States. We are expanding our microscope business. We just, in the past 8 months, have become kind of the exclusive independent sales representative for Nikon instruments in the Houston region. So we sell a lot of their clinical microscopes into the hospital and medical market. And, we see that as a growth area. And it's, service actually is a very good lead into sales because we go in and we see equipment that needs to be replaced, and if we're recommending a replacement and we can also then provide a quote for that replacement, it's a very good lead in. And it's obviously we always have the customer's best interest at heart, and but if they're going to buy it, we would want to sell it.
And yeah, sorry, go on.
Well, I was going to say, as far as long term, I think this is a sustainable business for the future, and my children haven't indicated a strong interest in it yet, but obviously, I would like it, and my partner would like to see it continue on beyond us. At the very least, I'd like it to provide for my retirement, but hopefully, it'll do more than that.
I'm sure. And if the reviews online are anything to go by, I'm sure you won't struggle there. And as long as the standards are maintained in
and that therein lies the rub.
What's the most challenging aspect of your business? What's the thing that you come up against a lot that you not keep you up at night, but is particularly difficult?
It's really the biggest, it's having to train staff. I mean, it is finding people who fit the mold of what we're looking for in terms of being able to understand the products and help the customers in a way that is beneficial to the customer. I mean, just because, and you see this in all industries, I mean, there's people who are technically expert and know the field really well, but they're not particularly good at either communicating it or selling it to other people. What we do while we are selling products, the goal is not to just to get the customer to buy. The goal is to get the customer what they want and what they need, and to find someone who can do that in a compassionate and non-salesy way is a challenge, and that is the biggest challenge.
Do you hire on like attitude, or do you hire on experience?
It's more attitude. If you have a desire to learn, and you can and you have the skills to learn it, then we'll take a chance. But you have to want to do it. If you don't want to do it, it's not going to work. I'm not going to say we expect our employees to work after hours, but it's not the kind of job where you kind of turn off work when you leave at the end of the day, because it's such a complicated topic. You really need to be practicing it outside. You have to enjoy doing it outside of work, or it's not going to be beneficial to the customers when you're here. And
do you enjoy it outside of work?
I do. I'm more into birding than astronomy. I got into the business because of the astronomy aspects. I bought my first telescope here about 15 years ago, but well, not my first.
You were
a customer telescope. I was a customer first. Yeah, I'm like the guy who did the Norelco razors. I liked it so much I bought the company. But I was a customer probably 15 years ago. That's how this business was on my radar. But I am more into birding now, mainly because I don't like staying up as late as I used to.
Cool. Okay. I think I got everything.
Did you have a light on, by the way, or was that the sun coming through your window?
I tell you what it is. I've got my office is also like a loft, and I've got I get such lovely sunlight in here, but as it creeps around, there's a point in the day where I will be blinded. And I don't want to shut the shutters down while I'm doing the call, because then all the lighting gets a bit weird. So I haven't been like rushing you, but I've known I've got this mental part where there'll be a point where we've reached the point of no return, and I either have to shuffle around the room or just pretend that I'm not being blinded. So
I mean, I can see it on your books behind you, and I'm like, that's really bright. I mean, kind of unusual for February in the UK. You're in the UK, right?
I think the UK gets knocked for its weather, I think unjustifiably, to be honest. So I've got video proof of the sun exists.
Exactly. In the winter. No, we were in there, well, in 2019, before the pandemic. We went to Winchcombe out in the Cotswolds, and that was just magical.
Oh, I can't really compete with that. You probably picked the most beautiful place you could visit in the UK. So unfortunately, you've peaked there. You've got no reason to come back.
I love London. I could live in London. So anyway, well, listen, thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll talk again soon.